I'll never forget the moment my son-in-law looked me dead in the eye while standing at his own wedding and called me the one thing no parent ever expects to hear: a family embarrassment. It happened at the Ritz-Carlton in San Francisco. A ballroom so big and so polished you could see a reflection in the marble floors. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls. A four-piece string quartet playing music I couldn't even name. 400 guests, dressed like royalty, sipping champagne that cost more than my rent. And in the middle of all that glitter and gold, there I was, me, Evelyn Hart, standing in the shadows, trying to smile, trying to be invisible. I thought I could get through the night quietly, but Preston Vale had other plans. Preston, the man my daughter Isla chose to marry. The man who had the Vale name behind him, with a family empire so wide it reached across tech, politics, and media. Preston, with his slick hair, perfect tuxedo, and arrogance polished sharper than the knives on the dinner tables. He raised his glass, smiled at the crowd, and then turned toward me. His voice boomed across the room, clear enough to slice through the music. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight is about love, about family, but sometimes family means carrying a little baggage." The crowd chuckled, thinking he was making a joke, but his eyes never left mine. Some of you may have noticed my bride's mother in attendance. She insisted on being here. And while we welcome everyone, it's important to be honest. You see, he paused, dragging it out like he was savoring the moment. Not every family member represents the life we want to build. The room shifted. Glasses froze midair. Conversations stopped. Preston's smile sharpened. "So let me be plain. My mother-in-law, Evelyn Hart, is not just a family embarrassment. She's proof that sometimes success skips a generation." I felt the sting as if he'd slapped me across the face. 400 phones lifted instantly, recording, live streaming, capturing every breath of humiliation. I saw Isla, my daughter, standing stiff as stone beside him, her eyes locked on the floor, her hands clenched around her bouquet. She didn't stop him. She didn't even look at me. And me? I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't walk out. I just stood there, still as glass, staring at the one man in the room who mattered more than all the others. Leonard Vale, Preston's father, the CEO. The man who had built the Vale empire with charm, cunning, and connections deep enough to bend governments. He sat at the head table, calm as a statue, sipping his wine, watching, measuring, and I gave him the slightest nod, a tiny signal no one else caught, a nod that would later force him to stand up, lower his head in front of the world, and bow to me. But I'll get there. Right now, all you need to know is that in that ballroom, at that wedding, in front of 400 people, I was branded a family embarrassment. And from that moment on, my silence was over. After Preston's little performance, the energy in the room shifted. People didn't look at me like a guest anymore. They looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet, like the poor relative who had somehow snuck past security. I scanned the head table. Donors. Venture capitalists. A few senators who had built their campaigns with Vale money. Journalists eager for sound bites. Every seat filled with someone who could move markets with a single phone call. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a power summit disguised as a celebration. And I was the designated target. I locked eyes with Leonard Vale. He didn't flinch, didn't frown, didn't rise to stop his son from dragging me through the mud. He simply leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and watched. That was the moment I realized something. My humiliation was entertainment for them. A show. A reminder of how high they stood and how far I had supposedly fallen. But here's the thing about being underestimated. People forget that silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence is calculation. I tried to leave quietly after the ceremony. I thought maybe I could at least hug my daughter before disappearing. I found Isla in the bridal suite corridor. Her veil had been lifted, her lipstick slightly smudged from champagne. She looked radiant and terrified at the same time. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "congratulations." But before she could answer, Preston appeared like a shadow behind her. He blocked the door, jaw clenched, smile gone. "This isn't your place, Evelyn," he said softly, his voice a blade only I could feel. "You've already had your moment tonight. Don't make it worse." Two hotel staff members stepped forward. I could see the discomfort in their eyes. They didn't want to push me out, but Preston's glare gave them no choice. Isla turned her head away. She didn't defend me, didn't speak. She just stared at her reflection in the mirror, like if she didn't move, she wouldn't shatter. I let them escort me out. I didn't fight, but as I walked down that long carpeted hallway, I made myself a promise. If Preston thought humiliating me would bury me, he had just handed me the shovel. I found myself near the service exit, the hallway where hotel staff carried trays and linen carts. The air smelled like bleach and perfume. My heels echoed on the tiles. And there, on the ground, was a crumpled seating card. One of the fancy ones printed in gold leaf, with the guest list on the back. I picked it up, smoothed it out, and slipped it into my clutch. Most people would have thrown it away. But I saw what it was, a map of power. Every donor, every investor, every journalist, all in one place. That card wasn't trash. That card was leverage. As I walked out of the hotel, I replayed the night in my head. Not just Preston's words, but the looks, the whispers. During cocktail hour, I'd felt it. Women in sequined gowns leaning toward each other, murmuring, "That's her. Evelyn. The one who can't keep a job. The one who lost everything." Men with cufflinks worth more than my car shaking their heads as if I was some cautionary tale. She used to be someone. Now look at her. One woman actually smiled at me and said, "You look well, considering." Considering what? That I'd been through hell and made it out alive? That I was standing in their world without the armor of wealth to shield me? They laughed at me because they thought I was powerless. They forgot that wolves don't always hunt in packs. Sometimes a lone wolf is far more dangerous. As the ballroom doors closed behind me, sealing me out, I whispered under my breath, so quiet it was almost a prayer. "You'll bow for the truth." The words felt strange on my tongue, but I meant every syllable. I wasn't sure how, and I wasn't sure when. But I knew one thing. The truth was my weapon, and sooner or later it would force even Leonard Vale, the untouchable CEO, to bend. And when he did, the entire world would watch. Back in my small Oakland apartment, the silence hit harder than the ballroom had. I sat on the edge of my bed, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the room, scrolling through my phone. The videos had already gone viral. Headlines screamed across my feed. Bridegroom calls mother-in-law family embarrassment at wedding. Society wedding overshadowed by public humiliation. Who is Evelyn Hart, and why does she embarrass the Vales? The tabloids didn't bother with facts. They painted me as jealous, bitter, a failed professional clinging to relevance. Comment sections lit up with strangers debating my worth. Some mocked me, others pitied me. Few cared about the truth. But I knew something the world didn't. I wasn't just some bitter, jealous mother-in-law. I was something far more dangerous. Boxes. Stacks of them. That's what surrounded me as I opened the closet. Old case files, binders, flash drives labeled in my neat handwriting. I pulled one out, flipped it open, and felt the weight of memory press against my chest. You see, years before Preston ever called me an embarrassment, before the tabloids smeared my name, I was Evelyn Hart, forensic compliance auditor. Big Four trained. 10 years of experience tearing through corporate books and exposing fraud. I once uncovered a payroll theft ring that siphoned millions from a Fortune 500 company. My report made headlines. My testimony put executives behind bars. And that's exactly why I was blacklisted. Someone somewhere decided Evelyn Hart was too dangerous. Rumors spread that I was unstable, difficult, obsessed. My career dried up overnight. But here's the thing about skills like mine. They don't vanish. They sharpen in silence. And when Preston called me a family embarrassment in front of 400 people, what he really did was remind me who I was. Not weak, not irrelevant, not powerless. I was Evelyn Hart. And I was about to make the Vale family remember exactly why the truth is the one thing you can never bury. If truth in public matters to you, subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories right now. And if you don't subscribe, then do me a favor, head into the comments and tell the world why justice isn't worth your attention. The morning after the wedding humiliation, I cleared my small kitchen table and turned it into a war room. I taped up every headline, every screenshot, every tweet that had spun my name into a punchline. 400 guests had filmed Preston branding me a family embarrassment, and the press didn't miss a beat. The San Francisco Chronicle, Business Insider, even gossip blogs that had never heard of me suddenly wrote like they'd known me for years. But instead of crying, instead of begging Isla to call me back, I printed every article and pinned them up. And then I asked myself one question: who benefits? I traced the amplification. Not the first posts, the guests were just sharks smelling blood. But the second wave. The polished op-eds, the trending hashtags, the podcasts that suddenly had exclusive Vale family insights. They weren't random. They were coordinated. By the end of the night, I had 3 names circled in red. 3 PR fixers. All with prior contracts linked to one company, Valestra Dynamics. Leonard Vale's company. Preston hadn't just humiliated me. He'd weaponized his father's empire to bury me before I could even fight back. But he made one mistake. He assumed I wouldn't follow the trail. I started local. San Mateo County Records Office. The air inside smelled like dust and toner, the kind of place where secrets hide in plain sight. I asked for filings tied to the Vale Foundation for Civic Futures. A glossy name Preston had bragged about in interviews, claiming it funded apprenticeships for underprivileged youth. The clerk slid over a stack of annual returns. Most people would have skimmed them. I dissected every line, and there it was. Payment vouchers listed to North Bay Learning Initiative, an Oakland vendor supposedly running tech boot camps. But the listed address? A strip mall hair salon. No classrooms. No teachers. No students. Millions of dollars funneled into thin air. Most people wouldn't catch it. But I wasn't most people. That night, I stared at the mismatched addresses, feeling my pulse quicken. If this was just one thread, what would happen if I pulled harder? The next clue took me across a border. Toronto, Union Station. It was freezing, my breath turning into fog as I walked toward an address listed for another educational vendor. Suite 214, Bay Street. Sounded legitimate. But when I arrived, it wasn't an office. It wasn't even a school. It was a mailbox rental center. Invoices had claimed hundreds of thousands in payments for STEM apprenticeships delivered here. Apprenticeships that never existed. I stood there, staring at that metal box with a brass number, and realized something chilling. The Vale family wasn't just laundering money through fake vendors. They were doing it across borders. Carefully, quietly, through shells most auditors would never double-check. But I wasn't most auditors. And this was no accident. At 2 a.m, California time, I logged into the Australian Securities and Investments Commission portal. I typed in another vendor name I'd seen buried in the filings, Vale Outreach Proprietary Ltd. Up popped a Sydney address, George Street, right in the CBD. But what caught my eye wasn't the address. It was the treasurer. The listed treasurer wasn't an Australian local. It was a Washington, D.C. lobbyist. The same consultant who handled the Vale family's U.S. Political Action Committee filings. A U.S. lobbyist serving as treasurer of an Australian shell company tied to charity funds? That wasn't sloppy. That was arrogant. They weren't even hiding it. They believed no one would look. But I was looking. And every time I did, the web got tighter. The breakthrough came in Palo Alto. A quiet coffee shop, Late afternoon. That's where I met Maya Rios. She couldn't have been more than 23. Nervous, clutching her oat milk latte like it was a lifeline. She'd interned for Valestra Dynamics the summer before. Thought she was joining a rocket ship company. Instead, she'd been told to copy invoices, scrub Slack threads, and delete sensitive conversations. She slid a USB drive across the table. "I redacted names," she whispered. "But you'll see enough." On that drive were Slack exports, procurement screenshots, emails where Preston himself wrote things like, "Make sure the vendor addresses don't overlap. It looks bad." Redacted or not, the pattern was undeniable. Money was being funneled into shells, and staff were told to clean the trail. Maya looked at me with scared eyes. "They'll bury me if they know I talked." I leaned forward. "They can't bury the truth. Not if we're careful." She nodded, trembling. And just like that, I had my first ally. Back home, I didn't celebrate. I worked. I laid out the files, time-stamped every piece, ran digital hash verifications to prove they hadn't been altered. I wrote declarations, printed hard copies, and had them notarized at a 24-hour UPS store. Chain of custody. Unbreakable. Because I knew exactly how the Vale family operated. If this ever went to court, they'd scream forgery. They'd pay experts to claim my files were doctored. But they couldn't argue with notarized timestamps, hashes, and affidavits. Every piece of evidence was airtight. And with each locked box I built, I felt the ground under the Vales begin to shake. Evidence means nothing if it stays in a drawer. So I filed reports. Through the SEC TIPS portal, I submitted documentation of falsified vendor payments. Through HMRC in the UK, I filed complaints about charitable funds routed offshore. I even called the Canadian CRA hotline and submitted details about the Toronto mailbox scheme. Each report filed in a different jurisdiction, each one triggering an inquiry that couldn't be silenced with one phone call. Because here's the truth about empires like the Vales, they thrive in the dark. But shine enough light on them from enough directions, and they can't hide anymore. 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Evelyn Hart? Yes. This is Clive Armitage, independent auditor, Canary Wharf. I reviewed your HMRC submission. His voice was crisp, professional, but I could hear the undercurrent, interest mixed with unease. Your documentation lines up with discrepancies we've already noted in Valestra's ESG appendices, he said. The addresses don't reconcile. The claimed beneficiaries don't exist. For a moment, I closed my eyes. Someone across the ocean had just confirmed I wasn't imagining it. Clive continued. I need the fuller dossier. Everything you have. If what you're saying holds, this isn't just a UK issue. It's multi-jurisdictional fraud. I looked at the stacks of files on my table. This was it. The door had opened. What started as one woman's humiliation at a wedding was about to become something far bigger. That night, I sat in the dark, watching the skyline glow across the bay. The Vales had mocked me as a family embarrassment. But piece by piece, I was building something they couldn't laugh away. And they had no idea that the moment I handed over that dossier in London, their empire wouldn't just crack. It would start to collapse. The week after London called me back, I woke to a notification storm. Preston had gone on a podcast, one of those influencer studios with neon signs and tell it like it is vibes, and he turned my name into a trophy. I watched the clip in silence. He sat in a velvet chair, confidence dripping like cologne, talking to a host who kept nodding along as if truth were a brand deal. She's unstable, Preston said, eyes shining for the camera. Obsessed. She's been stalking our family for years. My wife has nightmares. We're exploring restraining orders. The host leaned in, hungry. So the rumors about forged documents? Preston gave a sympathetic smile, the kind you use to sell hand sanitizer during a crisis. She makes things up to feel important. It's sad, honestly. They rolled B-roll. Me in the ballroom, stiff-backed, the clip where he called me a family embarrassment. Their editor slowed my face as if grief proved madness. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't call Isla. I didn't drown in shame. Instead, I tapped download, saved the episode, logged the timestamp, noted the sponsors, and wrote down the words unstable, obsessed, forged. Defamation isn't a feeling, it's a record. I scrubbed to the end. Preston grinned into the lens. If you're listening, Evelyn, let it go. You'll never win against us. He was right about something. I wasn't going to win by shouting. I'd win by showing. And before he hit publish, the first domino had already tipped. I closed the app and walked out the door, not to clap back, but to pull a thread I knew would snap. People think power is about loud rooms. It's not. Power hides in quiet libraries. I took the train to the State Bar Ethics Library, where the carpet swallows footsteps and the air smells like ink and rules. I wasn't there to rage. I was there to follow the paperwork. I traced council overlap, who represented Valestra Dynamics, the Vale Foundation, and the family's federal PAC. On paper, they were separate. In practice, they shared a backbone. Same boutique firm filed compliance letters for the foundation and executed PAC strategy memos. Same senior partner appeared in donor correspondence. Same junior associate was copied on vendor recommendations. That's not illegal by itself, but it meant strategy bled across walls that were supposed to be fireproof. It meant when the foundation paid North Bay Learning Initiative from Oakland a strip mall mailbox, the same brains who managed PAC budgets had vetted it. I wasn't chasing headlines. I was circling conflicts. I pulled up the firm's engagement notices. One footnote mattered. Council will advise shared stakeholders on governance alignment. Governance alignment. Beautiful phrase. Dangerous in the wrong hands. If the same council touched the charity, the PAC, and the parent company, every oops wasn't random. It was systemic. I made copies. I highlighted signatures. I wrote 3 letters in plain English even a camera-ready board could understand. This isn't about a mother-in-law. This is about the same hands stirring every pot. On my way out, a paralegal brushed past me whispering into a phone, "She's here." Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. Either way, I tightened my scarf and kept walking. Paper trails are louder than whispers. You can learn a lot from a room that thinks it can't be touched. I bought a ticket to a Valestra investor luncheon. Hotel ballroom, midday sunlight, pictures of water sweating on linen. On stage, a director with a pristine smile, Gerard Pike, giving the kind of speech that sounds like a lullaby until you listen to the words. "Our vendor governance is industry-leading," he said. "Our charity impact? Unmatched." The moderator opened for questions. Polite hands went up. I kept mine down until the third query fizzled, then stood. "Can you describe your vendor verification process?" I asked, especially when a charity beneficiary in Toronto is a mailbox rental and a Sydney vendor lists the treasurer of your US PAC consultant. Silence isn't always quiet. Sometimes it hisses. Gerard blinked. We utilize third-party verification services." "Which ones?" "Our general counsel would have the specifics." "Do those specifics include cross-border ABN and CRA checks?" I didn't blink. "Or are you relying on internal attestations from teams who also run political messaging?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and reached for water he didn't drink. Cameras that had been filming casually began to pay attention. A woman, too, rose up, typed furiously. "We take compliance seriously," he said at last, the corporate emergency sentence. "I'm glad," I said, sitting down. "Because regulators do too." I felt eyes on me as if my chair had caught fire. Good. Let them look. Let them wonder how a family embarrassment spoke like a regulator with a ledger. By dessert, I had what I came for, a director on tape fumbling the only question that mattered. Fumbles become leverage. Leverage becomes meetings. I didn't march to a high-rise. I walked into a non-profit legal clinic with a flickering exit sign and coffee that tasted like resolve. Sienna Caldwell, pro bono counsel, listened to everything without interrupting. She had a way of writing notes like every word could matter later, which, in my life, it always did. When I finished, she tapped her pen. "They'll try 2 things," she said. 1, retaliation, personal and professional. 2, a lawsuit to scare you quiet. "I figured," I said. "I'm not quiet." "Good," she said. "First, we document retaliation. Save every call, every message, every weird car idling outside. Then we serve preservation letters to their entities and vendors. If they delete anything after notice, it's sanctionable." "And the lawsuit?" "Anti-slap," she replied. "If they sue to shut you up, we move to strike. If we win, they pay your attorney's fees." She leaned in. "But I need you to be disciplined. No public claims you can't prove on paper. No guesses. Only what you can show." "I'm not guessing," I said. "I'm counting." She smiled for the first time. "Then let's count out loud." We drafted letters with clinical precision, preserve emails, Slack threads, invoices, backup logs, vendor intake forms, board minutes, PR contracts. We sent them certified. We logged the tracking numbers like they were diamonds. Sienna slid a folder across the desk. "One more thing," she said. "If someone inside wants to help you, make sure they talk to me first. We protect them under whistleblower counsel. No cowboy moves." "I have someone," I said. "She's brave." "Good," Sienna said. "Then let's be careful with her courage." That night, a black SUV idled across from my building for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I didn't flinch. I pressed record. Evidence isn't a weapon until you sheath it in process. Maya texted me at 11:12 p.m. "We're on." We met in a parking lot in Richmond, the wind off the bay cutting through our jackets. She looked small under the sodium lights, but her jaw was set like a bridge. "This is with counsel," she said, tapping a letter in her tote. "The vendor's compliance officer authorized preservation access." "I'm not breaking in." "I know," I said. "We do this clean." Inside the co-location facility, the air was refrigerator cold. Rows of server racks thrummed like beehives. A technician, eyes tired, badge lanyard swinging, led us to a cage with a lock code he entered without a word. Maya logged into a console labeled VL, Archive 03. The screen flickered, then filled with directories, FIN_AP, VN_intake, procure_Q2, backup_XML. "We're here for the invoice pipeline," she whispered. She pulled up a set of XML files with names that looked harmless. NBLI_Q4.xml, bailoutreach_AUS.xml, stem_aprent_Q2.xml. "Watch this," she said, opening 2 side by side. Clone structures. Identical line items. Vendor IDs swapped like masks. She searched metadata. "Timestamps," she said, pointing. "Batch jobs rewritten on the same minute every quarter. Look at the user, SVC_proc_admin. That's a service account. But the change history shows a human override." She exported logs, then hashed each file, SHA 256 strings spilling across the screen like a secret alphabet. We printed chain of custody labels with the technician watching, then sealed drives in tamper-evident bags. He initialed the labels. We initialed the log. That's how truth becomes heavier than rumor. Maya leaned back, rubbing her eyes. "I thought I was crazy," she said. "You're not crazy," I said. "You're honest." We stepped out into the night, the wind louder now. Somewhere, a ship horn groaned. We weren't hackers in the dark. We were witnesses carrying light. As we reached our cars, Maya's phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She showed me the screen. I nodded. "Don't answer," I said. "Let counsel call back." 2 days later, I walked a brick corridor to an administrative office at a public university that had once headlined a Vale Foundation gift, a transformational STEM grant. The receptionist checked my appointment, then led me to Dr. Phoebe Lane, Associate Provost. No small talk. Just a tired smile that said she'd had too many meetings like this. "I'll be blunt, Ms. Hart," she said. "We never received that money." I let the silence settle. "Then the press photos?" "A donor event with no gift," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. We flagged it quietly when the wire never arrived. Their PR team promised it was a timing issue. Then they stopped replying. Inside the folder, the press release, the staged photos. Students in pristine lab coats, a banner with the foundation's logo, Leonard in a suit holding a novelty check with a blank amount. "Do you have internal correspondence?" I asked. She nodded, passing me an email chain with subject lines that felt like bruises. "Re, awaiting funds." "Re, any update?" "Re, please advise on optics." One message from a Vale PR staffer was particularly clean. "We'd appreciate no public clarification. It confuses stakeholders." I scanned the room, potted ficus, diplomas, a cheap analog clock ticking too loudly, and thought about all the kids who would have used those lab benches if the money had been real. "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing documenting this." She exhaled like she'd been holding in air for months. "I didn't know where to send it." "You just did," I said, slipping the folder into my bag. In the hallway, a student wheeled a cart of microscopes past me. The sight shouldn't have hurt. It did. I promised myself that when this ended, something real would be built where a photograph had lied. Midnight here, afternoon in Sydney. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee gone cold while Ilara Ng, a forensic accountant with a laugh that sounded like it had learned not to, dialed into a video call. "I ran your list," she said, sharing her screen. ABNs for Vale Outreach Proprietary Ltd and Civic Futures AUNZ, both active, minimal filings, same registered agent. But here's the heart of it. She pulled up a ledger graph. Lines arced between entities like a constellation. Donor inflows hit the charity account. Within 48 hours, transfers route to a discretionary trust, Arbor Chase Family Trust. Trustee, Vale Family Services Proprietary Limited. My stomach tightened. "Can you tie that trustee to Leonard?" Eliora smiled without joy. "Director histories overlap with Vale Holdings International. And the trust paid a retainer to a DC firm, the same one connected to the PAC." The room felt smaller. The ocean felt smaller. "Can you memorialize this?" I asked. "I already have," she said, lifting a signed declaration to the camera. "And Ms. Hart? Be careful. People who move money across daylight don't expect anyone to follow it." "I don't expect them to expect me," I said. "That's the point." We hung up. I stared at my wall of printouts. Toronto mailbox, Sydney treasurer, staged grant, cloned invoices, ethics conflicts, like a detective who realizes the map on their wall isn't a map at all. It's a fuse. Somewhere in that web, a spark had already touched down. I could feel the heat rising even if I couldn't see the flame yet. I didn't sleep. I wrote. I opened a blank email to the chair of Valestra's audit committee, Marjorie Quinn, and kept my fingers from shaking by reminding myself, facts are hands that don't tremble. Subject, immediate audit committee action required, vendor and foundation irregularities, documentation attached. 7 points. No adjectives, no grandstanding, no vengeance on the page, just voltage. 1. Coordinated smear/PR overlap. 3 PR firms amplifying defamatory narratives share historical contracts with Valestra Dynamics, invoices attached. 2. Vendor address mismatch, US/CA Foundation payments to North Bay Learning Initiative, US, and Apex STEM Toronto, CA, routed to non-operational addresses, mailbox rentals. County filings, CRA license checks attached. 3. Sydney Treasurer conflict. Vale Outreach Proprietary Ltd lists US PAC consultant as treasurer. ASIC records attached. 4. Invoice cloning pattern. Backup logs, VL, archive, 03. Document quarterly XML cloning with vendor ID swaps. Hashes and chain of custody forms attached. Preservation notice previously served. 5. Non-received university grant. Public university confirmed no funds received despite press release and staged photo op. Internal correspondence attached. 6. Council conflict web. Same council advising parent company, foundation, and PAC on governance alignment. Engagement notices attached. 7. Regulatory cross-ref. Submissions filed with SEC, HMRC, CRA. UK Auditor Clive Armitage requests complete dossier. His preliminary discrepancy letter attached. Request. Immediate special meeting. Independent counsel. Litigation hold across parent, foundation, PAC, and PR vendors. Commitment to notify regulators within 5 business days. I CC'd outside independent counsel recommended by Sienna, and I BCC'd myself with a time-stamped copy printed and sealed. Before I hit send, I read it once more out loud, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as what I had always been beneath the noise, a forensic auditor who refused to blink. Then I clicked. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Ms. Hart, a voice said, tight, professional. This is the Audit Committee office. We've received your materials. The committee chair is convening a special session. You are requested to attend. When? 48 hours. Who will be there? Pause. Senior leadership. Outside counsel. And Mr. Leonard Vale. I stared at the ceiling, the hairline cracks that looked like rivers on an old map. I thought of the ballroom, the marble, the phones in the air. I thought of the nod I had given him like a promise only I could hear. 48 hours. They wanted me in the room. Good. I wanted to be standing when the truth walked in. I printed one more copy of the memo and slid it into my bag on top of the crumpled gold seating card from the wedding, the first map I'd ever needed. When the doors close this time, I won't be on the wrong side. And when a man like Leonard Vale finally understands what truth weighs, he doesn't just apologize. He bows. If powerful people can rewrite facts, you need the full story. Subscribe. Still not subscribing? Comment your reason. Stand by it publicly. The first sign of retaliation wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A letter in my mailbox with no return address. Just one line scrawled across the paper. Stop digging or you'll regret it. That same night, my phone lit up with blocked calls. No voice on the other end, only the sound of breathing. Then silence. I didn't panic. I documented. Screenshots. Audio recordings. Chain of custody logs. By morning, my counsel had already filed for restraining notices. We added new preservation letters, broad, unmissable. Sent certified to Valestra Dynamics, the Vale Foundation, and every PR firm I'd tied to their campaign. If they thought intimidation would shut me down, they hadn't learned the first rule about auditors like me. I don't scare. I record. But the threats told me something important. They weren't just worried about rumors anymore. They were worried about evidence. And once the powerful get scared, mistakes start spilling out. That night, headlights idled outside my window for 15 minutes before peeling away. I wrote down the license plate. Their fear was starting to show. I knew I couldn't trust the press to get it right on their own. So I arranged something rare, an off-record huddle. 3 reporters. Not randoms. People who had earned reputations for cutting through smoke. One from the Chronicle, one from a non-profit investigative outfit, one from a national tech desk. We sat in the back of a dim cafe. I didn't posture. I didn't dramatize. I laid documents on the table, notarized filings, time-stamped hashes, university correspondence, Sydney Trust declarations. You can't print until 2 of you verify every piece, I said. Dual confirmation. Otherwise, this dies in spin. They nodded. This wasn't a feeding frenzy. It was a pact. The Chronicle reporter broke the silence. If even half of this checks, you're sitting on one of the largest cross-border charity fraud cases we've seen in a decade. I sipped my black coffee. Then don't take my word. Check. They left with copies in sealed envelopes. I watched them walk out into the San Francisco fog, knowing that the fuse I'd lit was moving faster than anyone could stop. My phone buzzed 10 minutes later. Unknown number. A text, "We know who you met with." I didn't expect the next confrontation to come from my daughter. We met on the Sausalito ferry, where the waves slapped against steel and the wind made conversation private. Isla's eyes were tired, her smile brittle. "Mom," she said, "you don't understand. I was told to manage you." I stared at her. By who? By Preston. By his family. They said if you kept quiet, if you played along, it would help optics. That you could, heal privately. Her voice cracked on the last words. Optics. They had turned my daughter into a handler. I put my hand over hers. "Sweetheart, they didn't ask you to manage me. They asked you to erase me." She looked away, tears sliding into the wind. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "You don't have to believe me," I said softly. "Believe the paper trail. It doesn't lie." Her silence wasn't betrayal this time. It was confusion. And confusion meant the wall they'd built around her was starting to crack. Cliffhanger. As the ferry docked, she whispered one sentence I'll never forget. "Dad-in-law says you'll ruin us all." She didn't realize yet ruin wasn't my goal. Truth was. Back home, I pulled the next thread, donor math. I spread out IRS Form 990s, one after another, highlighting administrative expenses. In election years, admin fees spiked like clockwork, right before shareholder proxy campaigns where the Vale family needed votes. I ran the numbers. Millions shifted under the name of overhead, but always aligning with campaign pushes. It wasn't just sloppiness. It was orchestration. Charity inflows greasing shareholder outcomes. I circled the spikes in red ink. Patterns don't lie. They'd sold the public philanthropy. They'd bought themselves power. And if the SEC hadn't connected those dots yet, they were about to. I emailed the charts to Sienna, my counsel. She called back immediately. "Evelyn," she said, "this isn't donor abuse. This is election interference by another name." Valestra's press office fired its first real shot. A glossy press release hit inboxes. Foundation finances demonstrate unprecedented transparency. I pulled it apart within minutes. They claimed the STEM grant had been delivered in full. My folder from the university said otherwise. They listed North Bay Learning Initiative as operational since 2019. San Mateo filings proved it dissolved in 2018. They touted Australian outreach programs in their ESG appendix. ASIC showed 0 employees, 0 payroll. Line after line, their statement contradicted their own prior filings. And contradictions aren't just sloppy, they're evidence. I printed the release, stapled it to the filings, wrote false in thick black ink across each mismatch. Then I scanned the bundle and sent it to every journalist who had agreed to dual confirmation. 10 minutes later, my inbox filled with out-of-office replies. But one reply wasn't out of office. It was from an internal PR staffer. No name, just one sentence. "Thank you. They forced us to sign this." The summons came by courier, an invitation printed on heavy stock, embossed with the crest of the private club where San Francisco's elite hid behind oak doors. The audit committee wanted me there. Closed session. 2 hours. No guests. I arrived with my own insurance, an external court reporter, hired independently. I introduced him politely, then placed his recorder on the polished table. The room bristled. One director cleared his throat. "This is irregular." "No," I said, sliding the preservation letters across the table. "This is compliance." Leonard Vale sat at the far end. Calm. Silent. Watching me the same way he had in the Ritz ballroom. For 90 minutes, I laid out the 7 points of my memo. Vendor fraud. Shell treasurers. Cloned invoices. Non-existent grants. Council conflicts. Donor math. PR contradictions. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I narrated with the cadence of a ledger, each fact stacking on the last until silence grew heavy. When I finished, Leonard leaned back. "We'll take this under advisement," he said. The court reporter marked the time. On my way out, one director slipped me a folded sheet. I opened it in the elevator. 3 words, "Not all blind." That night, an encrypted chat notification pinged on my laptop. Unknown sender. Attached, a draft of the audit committee minutes. But this draft was sanitized. My exhibits vanished. The staged grant reduced to delayed disbursement. The Sydney conflict erased entirely. I stared at the screen, pulse steady. Someone inside wanted me to see how fast they were scrubbing. I copied the file, hashed it, time-stamped it. The sender wrote only once, "This is what they'll release." Then the chat window closed. I sat in the dark, listening to the city breathe, and knew the truth was rotting in real time. I forwarded the sanitized minutes to Sienna. Her reply came instantly, "This is obstruction. Lock it down now." The next morning, we moved. At 9:02 a.m., my counsel's office served litigation holds on Valestra Dynamics, the Vale Foundation, affiliated PACs, and their PR vendors. Every email, every chat, every invoice, every backup log, preserved. At 9:37 a.m., an e-discovery vendor logged confirmation receipts. At 10:12 a.m., we filed notice with federal court. From that moment forward, any deletion wasn't just risky. It was sanctionable, criminal. The preservation clock had started ticking, loud enough that even Leonard Vale would hear it. And once the clock starts, it never stops. That night, my inbox filled with frantic forwards, directors panicking, PR staff whispering, insiders cracking. And as I scrolled, one line from a nervous employee burned itself into my mind. "They think if they bow, it all goes away. If this vanished tomorrow, only subscribers would know the end." Subscribe. Refusing? Comment why silence helps you more than truth. The unraveling began not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but on a Zoom call. Boxes lit up across the screen. State attorneys general from California, New York, Illinois. Then more tiles joined, counsel from the UK's Serious Fraud Office, Canada's Charities Directorate, Australia's ASIC. I sat off camera, muted, watching the name scroll like an indictment before it was even written. "Thank you for the dossier," one U.S. Deputy AG said. "We've compared vendor addresses and disbursement records. The anomalies are systemic, not incidental." The Canadian representative added, "The CRA confirms the listed charity has no payroll, no programs, no employees. Receipts show wire transfers only." And then the Australian voice, sharp, efficient, funds routed through Arbor Chase Family Trust. Ties to Vale Holdings International. "We are opening inquiries effective immediately." Hearing it out loud was different from knowing it. For months, I had pieced this web together at my kitchen table. But now governments were lifting it whole. They didn't see me as a mother embarrassed at a wedding. They saw me as the origin of a case file that spanned oceans. As the call ended, the California AG said one more line before signing off. "This may require criminal exposure for senior leadership. If regulators are the law's fist, shareholders are its knife." And their knife was already unsheathed. Valestra's Proxy Forum, a place normally reserved for quarterly votes and sleepy Q&As, exploded. An activist fund posted my full memo exhibits, the Toronto mailbox photos, the staged grant emails, the Australian trust ledgers. Side by side with Preston's podcast clips calling me unstable and obsessed. Retail investors piled in, furious. One typed, "I bought stock thinking I was funding clean energy, not family trusts." Another, "We demand the board step down. Where's the oversight?" Screenshots spread across Twitter, Reddit finance boards, even LinkedIn groups of mid-level tech workers who usually stayed quiet. Numbers don't have feelings, but investors do. And once their money feels dirty, they sharpen their pitchforks. By evening, a post with 22,000 likes carried a headline no PR firm could spin away. "The family that branded their mother-in-law a disgrace now branded a fraud." The next chapter unfolded 12 time zones away. At dawn Sydney time, regulators knocked on the glass doors of Arbor Chase Family Trust's office. The receptionist froze. The trustee, pale and sweating, emerged with trembling hands. "Search authority," the lead officer said, sliding papers across the desk. They seized ledgers, bank statements, contracts. Within hours, word leaked that the trustee had requested a cooperation deal. Translation? He would hand them the receipts if it meant saving himself. And once ledgers start talking, they don't stop. From my apartment, watching the news feed roll in, I whispered the same words I had whispered leaving the Ritz ballroom. "You'll bow for the truth." That night, my inbox pinged with a PDF. Anonymous sender. Title page. Preliminary ledger review. Vale Family Services. The numbers screamed louder than threats ever could. 2 days later, I was in Toronto, the sky gray and the air sharp. At a notary office, the landlord of the strip mall building signed an affidavit. His voice was plain, unschooled, but every word was gold. "This unit has been a mailbox service since 2005, he said. North Bay Learning Initiative never rented office space here. They just paid for a box." He attached receipts, annual rental fees, signed by clerks who remembered the Vale Foundation courier who picked up mail twice a month. The notary's seal landed heavy, final. There it was. Proof that millions in charity programming flowed to a metal slot behind a glass counter. As I stepped outside, snow starting to fall, my phone buzzed with an alert. Valestra stock down 17% in pre-market trading. The special meeting was held in the Valestra Auditorium, stage lights glaring against polished wood. Shareholders filled the seats, murmurs rising like a tide. Independent counsel took the podium. A projector screen lit up with a timeline, vendor payments, foundation filings, PAC overlaps. And then the clips played. Preston, in that neon podcast studio, calling me unstable. Preston's emails to PR staff pushed the homeless angle harder. Make her toxic. Gasps filled the room. Some shareholders leaned forward. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The council clicked to the next slide. Side-by-side images, the university's staged grant photo and the provost's email confirming no funds received. Whispers turned to shouts. The room wasn't polite anymore. It was a jury. And then the stage lights shifted. Leonard Vale rose slowly from his seat at center table. My heart pounded. I knew what was coming, but hearing it in silence, under the glare of 400 eyes, made the air heavier than stone. Leonard Vale stepped forward, shoulders bent, his silver hair catching the light. And then he bowed. 7 seconds. No words. Just a man whose empire had cracked wide open, lowering himself until silence swallowed the room. When he straightened, his voice carried no polish. On behalf of Valestra Dynamics, I apologize to Ms. Evelyn Hart, to our shareholders, and to the public we misled. The board shuffled. A director removed his badge and walked out. Another followed. Resignations fell like dominoes. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood, meeting his eyes the way I had that night at the wedding. Back then, he thought my nod meant surrender. Now, he knew it had been a promise. Cameras flashed, capturing forever the moment the man who once let me be humiliated in a ballroom bowed for the truth. Settlement negotiations stretched for days, but every line bent toward the same outcome. Restitution to the charities. Clawbacks from misused funds. Independent compliance monitors. And one more term, a public apology to me, broadcast in the same media outlets that once painted me as bitter and unstable. Preston was forced to retract his statements in writing, acknowledging his campaign of defamation. His podcast sponsors dropped him within hours. When the ink dried, I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. Because truth doesn't sing, it exhales. As I left the conference room, reporters swarmed. One shouted, "Ms. Hart, was it worth it?" I didn't answer. Some truths don't fit into sound bites. Weeks later, I sat on a bench above the bay. The wind carried salt. The water glittered with late sun. Isla joined me, eyes clearer than they had been in months. She didn't try to defend Preston anymore. She didn't excuse the lies. "I want to do better," she said quietly. "Not for optics. For me." I squeezed her hand. Accountability isn't a press release. It's a choice. Every day. She nodded, and we watched the waves in silence. And in that stillness, I realized something. I would never again be anyone's prop. Not for a wedding. Not for a company. Not for redemption theater. Truth had cost me years. But reputation? Reputation had never been mine to protect. Final line. I stood, looking out over the water, and let the words settle in my chest. You can bury me in rumor. You can dress me in shame. But the truth will always rise. And when it does, someone bows. Miss one chapter and power rewrites history. Subscribe. Don't be rewritten. Still won't? Tell us why in comments. Own that choice.